And there are several ways to do PBLs. Like the example we're sharing with the aquarium designer, we took all the way, right, to building the aquarium. But I've also done, and Najesh has done, and other teachers in our high school have done several PBLs from Define Learning that didn't have that building component, that just had the project component. And it was amazing. Like Connie said, I'd be looking for a project in economics and I'd plug in gas prices. And there was a gas prices project that had something to do with inflation that we were directly studying in economics class that I didn't have to reinvent the wheel creating this PBL. It was already in defined. So there are several ways you can scale the project as a classroom teacher because I know there is that fear and trepidation about how am I going to fit this project in when you have all these standards to meet and you go on a quarterly basis to meet those standards, and how do you sacrifice reading literacy for building an aquarium? So there's several ways to scale the projects. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually gained buy-in for this. Connie mentioned it briefly, Trina mentioned it already, but the biggest buy-in had to come from the students. Teachers, yes, principal, yes, but if the students didn't buy in, we didn't have a project to even work on. So I pitched the novel study, 4 to 6 week novel study, and purchased a curriculum so that I could hit all those ELA standards that needed to be hit at the beginning of the school year. We wrote a research report on octopuses. We read every day in the classroom together. We talked about figurative language. We did all of the standards that needed to be done. And then we had some partnerships coming in from the community as well. In this picture here, our librarian came and signed our students up for library cards because several of our students were a little intimidated at the size of this novel. It is not marketed as a young adult novel. It is modern fiction. It's more than 300 pages. So when we gave them that hardcover novel, the size of it kind of intimidated them. And so we explained to them that you could listen to the audio too while you're reading, and that's also a way to get the content. So our librarian, Danielle Sanders, came in, signed all the students up who wanted library cards on the spot for library cards, and we were able to introduce them to ways to access this material. Like I mentioned earlier, accessing it is really the biggest challenge. If they think they can't read a 300-page book, there's nothing you can say to them to convince them otherwise, except to do it with them. So we read a large amount of the novel in the classroom together, worked on assignments about the novel itself, and then we gained buy-in from the students that way by introducing them to this really engaging material and telling them, hey, by the way, Dr. Hargis and the CTE teachers are already on board with a real world project. So if you want to advance to I think it's the next slide, we did a couple of incentive-based um, programs for them. So the first was if they completed the novel study with 80% work completion or 80% averages on their quizzes, they got to go on a field trip to Odyssey Aquarium in Scottsdale. And Trina was able to help us finance that through some Title I, I believe it was, funding. So they earned a field trip to Odyssey where we actually got to see a baby giant Pacific octopus who had just recently been added to the aquarium. And they were so excited. They named the octopus Marcella, the female version of Marcellus. So they were really making these great connections with the characters in the novel as we went along. And then we went to the aquarium and they were getting ideas for how to design their own. So then on the next slide here, I believe we have the actual project and how it looked in the classroom. Once we got toward the end of the novel study and had gotten back from the aquarium, students were able to work independently or in partners or in small groups. And what we see here is actually in Define Learning, where you can see that they had to design using very specific mathematical equations, the design of the aquarium, how many gallons of water it would hold. So in English class, we were doing math and science. And then on the right, the picture on the right, they had to make prototypes. That was part of the Define project is they could make a prototype of their design. So the gentleman here actually welded their prototype, and theirs was a rhombus, and their spec was for an 8 foot rhombus. And that ended up being the winning project. So we put several of their ideas out for a school-wide vote because we really wanted the entire student body involved and excited about this project. And this was the design that was ultimately selected. And then on the last slide, this is where we took it all the way to the finish line. We got an aquarium tank donated from the Herpetological Society in Phoenix because we didn't have the expertise or equipment, correct me if I'm wrong, Trina, to bend glass and really make it watertight. And the students pictured here are building a rhombus frame in construction class, so they'll still have the rhombus design, and the aquarium will get inserted right into the frame. But through this project, they have run into several real world issues. How do I get this rhombus design around this tank? How do I make sure it is watertight? How do we make sure the animals we select stay alive? So that's ag science coming into play. We had several students 3D print their prototypes, and we ran into all kinds of challenges with 3D printing. One aquarium took 19 hours prototype to print. And we learned if you do a block 3D prototype, if you fill it, it's going to fill the entire design in and take 19 hours. Whereas if you just do a frame of your design, it takes about 5 hours. So there were all these great real world troubleshooting incidents that our students had to really work through and be uncomfortable with and panic about. They're not going to meet their deadline for their aquarium design. What are they going to do? So it was just, I don't know, I loved that part of it. It's a little bit nerve-wracking at first, but when you get into that r messy real world problem solving scenario and your students actually solve those problems, it's just amazing to see that aha moment go off on their face where they've solved a problem.